Hello, everyone, and welcome to No Offseason presented by MassMutual. I'm Zena.
I'm Sabrina Merchant.
And I'm Ben Pickman.
And today on the show, is it warm in here? Let me check my temperature. Yeah. I think we're talking fever, people. We are going on our deep dive into the Indiana Fever, and we're going to cover it all. How are things looking for Caitlin Clark, especially with the new faces around her? How far can she take this team? Plus, how are they going to come together? We know things don't immediately gel for new teams coming together, so we'll have to see what does the road ahead look like with Stephanie White at the helm of this new cast. But first, friends and listeners, we are doing a mailbag episode very soon. That means we got to hear from you guys. We got to hear what your questions are about the upcoming WNBA season. Anything you need a take on. What do you want to hear Sabrina's deep thoughts on? What do you think what keeps him up at night? Yeah. We want to make sure that you guys get an opportunity to ask those questions. Send it to us. Email us at nooffseason@theathletic.com or find us on X, on Blue Sky. Just comment wherever you can. Let us know. And we want to feature your questions in the show. There's more details in the show notes, so check that out. Okay. Now, before we get to the Fever, the W season is set to start on Friday, and we are going to have our inaugural rendition of the Sabreena Scale. Now, I'm sure you've probably heard this similarly before because you've read it on the site. It's her power rankings, but we're making it formal, at least in this name, Sabreena Scale. I came up with it, and if you guys hate it, I will have no problems with it. Just let us know. We want to actually hear your thoughts. Maybe we can come up with something better. But in my opinion, it's which team is tipping the scale in their favor? Which one's sliding off? Are there any teams breaking the scale? We are going to get Sabrina's in-depth, detailed, no-holds-barred background thoughts on who is climbing up on her scale. So, first and foremost, Sabrina, it's not essentially the inaugural season of your power rankings. You've been doing this a long time. But I think there's some new
Google
listeners
Docs would agree with that.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like there's some listeners that absolutely are new to it, and they want to know, like, you do these power rankings every Sunday during the WNBA season, and that's a lot. How do you do it?
Yeah, so they run every Monday. That means I do write most of them on Sundays. The inaugural ones, like the preseason rankings, are honestly the most fun because, let's face it, over the course of the year, you kind of get anchored by, okay, this team was in 8th last week. It's hard to move them like 4 spots up or down based on 2 games that have happened since then. So these are really the most interesting because it's blank slate. There's no anchoring except for the one exception of I always put the defending champion in the first spot, regardless of what has happened during the offseason. The defending champs get that. It doesn't matter if I think that they're not going to be the very best team in the league this season, which, spoiler alert, I kind of think I would have put Minnesota if I didn't have that personal rule for myself. But it's really just, I look at the rosters in this particular moment. Who do I like the most? Who do I think makes the most sense as a team? Who do I think is going to play the best right now? It's not really who I think is going to end the year in this particular position. It's too far away to make those kind of decisions. So it's just as of May 12th, this is who I like, and we'll adjust as need be.
There you go. So, of course, if any WNBA players and teams are listening, if you're not looking for that trophy for the end of the season, if that's not enough motivation for you, getting the #1 spot in next year's Sabreena Scales will be the motivation, clearly, of what you need. So, of course, that explains a little bit of why New York was #1, but why else has New York kind of gotten that #1 spot and deserved it, at least in this first inaugural Sabreena Scales?
That trio of Jonquel Jones, Brianna Stewart, and Sabrina Scales is as good as any trio in the WNBA, and it's not as if they have no talent backing it up, right? Cleo Fevich is going to be stateside for the opener, one of the very best 3-and-D players in the WNBA. The addition of Natasha Cloud really rounds out that starting lineup. You've got Nyara Sabally, who was just tremendous during the WNBA finals against the Minnesota Lynx. And, that's a lot of talent, right? It's a lot of talent
stacked.
Again, and especially when that group has already done it together. So I think, it's a worthy consideration for #1. I'm a little worried about the forward depth, but that is a problem for later down the road.
Absolutely. With all the movement that happened in this offseason, it looks as if New York and Minnesota probably are the only teams that are coming in pretty solid with the teams they had last year. And that means not only do you have the same returning talent, you have that chemistry. And we know that that can be huge. Now, thinking about a team that doesn't quite look exactly the same as last year. Definitely some returners, but a lot of big new faces, both at the helm and the coaching route, and then also in the seat. The team we're talking about today, Indiana, they did not make your top 3 in the Sabreena Scales. Break that down to me, please.
Okay, so Indiana made the playoffs last year. They were a 6th seed. I think the offseason additions obviously improved them from that respect. They did move up 2 spots relative to where they ended last season. I think New York and Minnesota just have too much of an edge in terms of their continuity, as you mentioned, both from a coaching perspective and a talent perspective. And we've, seen much more consistency, I would say, out of their best players than, to be fair, Caitlin Clark has only had 1 season in the WNBA, so it's hard to say she hasn't been consistent. But,
Right.
It's hard to say that there's as long of a track record of success in Indiana as there has been in these teams. Really, the tough point was Vegas versus Indiana because Vegas did not make the finals, obviously. And I did not love their offseason, but the one thing I did love is that Chelsea Gray looks healthy. And I think if you have Chelsea Gray and Asia Wilson together, that is a combo that has historically been very, very difficult to beat. And I am riding with that group until someone tells me otherwise.
Okay, all right. Well, Indiana did start the preseason on a really good note.
Well, I was going to say they're riding high, but my question to Sabrina was, I know these are numerical rankings 1 through 13, but if you were going to tier these, because on the betting markets right now, there's not a big gap between 1 and 4 for championship contenders, the teams you listed, New York, Minnesota, Las Vegas, and Indiana. How far is the gap for you between Indiana and Seattle 4-5? Is it a huge gap?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things was actually coming up with team number 5 because there does seem to be a pretty big delta between Indiana and whoever comes next. I don't think if Seattle played Indiana in playoff series, it would be all that competitive. I don't think any potential 5 seed playing Indiana in playoff series would be all that competitive. To me, there's a top 4 who I think can all compete for a title. There's this middle group of 5 that I think are trying to get that last set of playoff seeds. I'm sorry, middle group of 6 that's trying to get those last 4 playoff seeds. And then a bottom 3 that's, looking to 2026.
Okay. And speaking of that tier, I appreciate that question, Ben, because I do feel as if this year there's more mobility between the tiers because of how many different stars shifted to different teams across the country. And so I'm looking at Chicago and I'm looking at how they bolstered their offense, particularly with Courtney Vandersloot. They added in Haley Van Lith. There's a lot more movement in the perimeter than they had and veteranship in the perimeter. So you got Chicago at number 6. Why was that?
It's really Sloot. Just the way that she has worked with Camila Cardoso during the preseason. Admittedly, it was just 1 game. She missed the second preseason game. But, you watch that first preseason game, pick and roll, Camila Cardoso, layup. And it's just okay, this is gonna work pretty well, right?
Right.
I think about just how dynamic Cardoso is on the roll, and she didn't have a good pocket passer with her last season in Chicago. It was kind of just Kennedy Carter, and Kennedy Carter is not really a passer. But more of a scorer, collapsing the defense and then getting the ball off to Cardoso. So somebody as capable of playmaking as Courtney Vandersloot, I think it's just going to make a monumental difference. And you just look at all the veterans they've added up and down the roster, like Rebecca Allen, Kia Nurse, Elizabeth Williams, not necessarily an addition, but she missed basically all of last season with an injury. There's just so much solid, competent play that's going to happen at these positions that wasn't the case last year. They were really sort of scrambling for options, especially when the injuries hit by the end of the season. Maybe I don't think that they could necessarily win a first round playoff series, but if you told me they finished 5th in the WNBA in the regular season, I would not be surprised.
Okay. Well, can't dive too much deeper into that because, of course, this show is about Indiana, but definitely go check out the Sabreena Scales every week coming out on Monday. She is going to be figuring out who is putting a little bit of weight on the scales in their favor or who needs to go get some weight, show up on the court a little bit more every single week. I love this breakdown. Gives me a lot of insight. And she also does some X and O's breakdown in those. So definitely go check those out. Okay. Without further ado, I put down my thermometer. It's officially hot. Yep, it's hot. Okay, it's time for Indiana Fever. We got to break this down. We've touched on them a little bit in our preseason shows. Check out the Eastern Conference preview that we did back on April 29th. So not too much preamble here. Caitlin Clark is back. Caitlin Clark is shooting further than she was. Further. I didn't think that was possible, but she's doing that. And she's also got her teammates. Aaliyah Boston's with her. Kelsey Mitchell's with her. And there's some new faces, some new competitors. DeWanna Bonner, Natasha Howard, both WNBA champions. Sophie Cunningham, Sydney Colson, another WNBA champion. And also veterans. More veterans across this roster. A lot of people are saying that when it comes to the Liberty protecting their crown, this might be the team looking to snatch it. So before we entertain that question, let's step back a little bit and talk about how the Fever got to this point. So Sabrina, I need a little bit of history of the franchise up until now.
Right. So the Indiana Fever debuted in WNBA in 2000. They have won one title in WNBA history. That came in 2012 with Tamika Catchings as their best player. Tamika Catchings, one of the very best players in the league's history, sort of just kept coming up against a wall repeatedly in the Eastern Conference playoffs, finally broke through in 2012. When she retires, the franchise sort of goes into a bit of a lull. That might be putting it generously. They have not had a winning season in quite some time. They get to draft Aaliyah Boston, number 1 in the lottery in 2023, get Caitlin Clark in 2024. Immediate success follows after drafting Caitlin Clark, and that has sort of sped up the timeline for a team that went 5-31 3 years ago that is now trying to compete for a championship in 2025.
Yeah, and I think that that's the part that we got to start with, Ben. Caitlin Clark has been the accelerant. She has been the gasoline on the fire, just adding to the offensive ability, the generation of this floor, the tempo and pace with which Indiana plays, and the creativity, really, that you see out on the floor, kind of unlocking different pick and roll options, cross-court passes, just the vision. And we should talk a little bit more about Caitlin's offseason, because a lot of some of these players we saw in Unrivaled. We got to see a little bit of what they were doing in other circumstances and how they were getting better. But everyone was wondering, how is Caitlin Clark looking? We saw her a lot of NBA games on the sidelines supporting. We saw her playing golf this summer. But how is her basketball game looking? Ben, you were in Indiana at training camp earlier this month. Tell me a little bit about the development and what you're seeing from Caitlin Clark.
Yeah, there are kind of two big things. Let's hit the news point first, Zena. The first thing is that Caitlin Clark has been dealing with a little bit of a quad injury throughout training camp. She missed their first preseason game against the Washington Mystics. She was kind of held out of that game for rest, I think precautionary reasons more than anything else. They played the next day against the Brazilian national team in her homecoming. She was not on the injury report for Indiana's preseason game against the Dream. So that is a good sign, but it's still something worth monitoring, knowing that, she did have a little bit of, an injury that held her out of at least one game. But to kind of the broader question of how does her offseason look, Caitlin really prioritized her body and trying to get stronger during the winter. And she was very diligent throughout, I guess, the entire offseason, having not played an Unrivaled, to get in the gym. As you mentioned, I was down in Indiana for part of their training camp, and I saw them against the Dream. I had someone with the team tell me that basically, there is an internal calendar that the Fever have that details the access to their practice court each day. And Caitlin would frequently book that 8 a.m. time slot, even when she had events the night before or events later that day. She was always kind of in the gym. She said to me that she was kind of in the weight room 4 times a week doing Olympic lifting, segmenting lower and upper body work, taking part in plyometric exercises, which are really helpful in improving balance, knowing that opponents are going to be really physical with her throughout the season. So that was one of the things that she really worked on. And when we think about, again, her starting point, not only was she building off the experience that she learned last year firsthand, but she's a new coach, Steph White, who was the head coach of the Connecticut Sun last year. And their player development coach is named Keith Porter, and he was a development coach with the Sun too. And so really this team used the scout that Connecticut drew up for Caitlin in the postseason when these two teams played and Connecticut beat the Fever. They used the scout as a jumping off point. So one of their very first drills that they worked on was a balance drill, a balance and ball handling drill. And Caitlin said that in their first workout, one of the first workouts they had, they spent 35 minutes just on ball handling, trying to, Stephanie White put it to me that she would sometimes be too far forward or too far back on her heel. So everything was off those perceived deficiencies. And so, again, that's where this priority for work and the roadmap really how it came about.
Dang, I felt bad that if I have a late night, I am not going to the gym at 8 a.m. Shout out to
Your
Caitlin
IG
on
stories,
that.
which is that's otherwise,
Well, that's fair. That's true. Unless it's work, unless it's a game, and then yeah, whatever. But I will say the media pictures of Caitlin Clark absolutely had me putting my arm workouts up a notch because she is jacked. She is cut. She looks lean. She looks ready. And it is so genius for, Stephanie White to bring in exactly what they scouted her for to be the thing that she needs to work on because, teams around the league absolutely were trying to get her off balance, trying to get her to have to battle through contact to finish at the rim. Now, Sabrina, of course, Caitlin can do this offseason work and make sure that she's prepared, but it's not just Caitlin out there on the court. It is a 5-on-5 league, right? It's got to be everyone chipping in. So now thinking about this roster and the new faces that have been brought in that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and Dewana Bonner, Natasha Howard, Sydney Colson. I mean, these are some really big names. And you're talking about players that have shown out on other teams. They've been the number one options on other teams. How does this fit with a team that was centered or has been centered around Caitlin Clark from a guard position, Aaliyah Boston from a center position or a big position, and then Kelsey Mitchell on the wing? How do you break this out?
So the Fever have 5 returning players from last season, and only 4 of them even managed to play together during the preseason because Damaris Dantas wasn't able to play during these 3 games. So that gives you Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, Lexi Hall, and Aaliyah Boston. And because of all the new additions, Lexi Hall, who absolutely lit the Nets on fire during the second half of the 2024 season, isn't even starting anymore because you have Sophie Cunningham and Dewana Bonner in at those wing slots. Naturally upgrades over Lexi Hall with all due respect to how good she was during that 2024 campaign. And you think about how Indiana ran their offense. It was a lot of Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, high pick and roll, Boston working off of the short roll, spraying out for those shooters, Kelsey Mitchell running some off-ball actions, and everybody else just sort of fit in around that. It's a lot harder to fit in around that when you're Natasha Howard and you've been an all-W player and you've been, most improved player and you're coming in saying things like you expect to be on MVP ballots this season and you're Dewana Bonner, one of the top 5 scorers in WNBA history. I think she could move up as high as number 3 like during the first week of this season. And like that's going to take some sacrifice. It's going to take some acknowledgement of where everybody goes because the fulcrum of this is still Clark and Boston. Like they are still the number 1 picks who came into Indiana and changed everything around, and they're the reason everything works around them. So I'm just fascinated to see who even starts around them. Like you saw one preseason game they had Dewana Bonner in the starting lineup next to Howard, Clark, Mitchell, and Boston, and the other game they had Sophie Cunningham in that spot. Do we reach a point where Bonner and Cunningham are both of the forwards and you bench Natasha Howard and she functions more as a backup 5 for Aaliyah Boston? Like there's so many different combinations that could work with all of the talent that they have. It's going to require a lot of changing of roles. Dewana Bonner was playing upwards of 30 minutes every night in Connecticut, and that's just not going to be needed or probably possible with all of the forward depth they have in Indiana. And maybe there are games where they don't even close with Aaliyah Boston because Natasha Howard is a better defensive option at center than Aaliyah is. So I think Stephanie White has so many levers to pull, and that is obviously a better problem to have than not having enough options. But it is going to require some time to figure out how everyone fits best together because we know the big 3 returning are very good together, but can we figure out what works around them?
Ben, I was going to ask you, did you get a sense from Stephanie White while you were at training camp, looking at the fact that Stephanie has so many different types of levers to pull, and it could also result in different looking teams, right? You could have a running team. You could have a half court kind of big team that operates really well in the half court. You could have a team that's really pick and roll focused. You can have a team that's really motion focused. Did you get a sense at all of what types of levers she wants to pull? What's going to be the theme for this team and how she's going to pick out those starting lineups?
I think the biggest piece of clarity is that they don't expect to have clarity until at least the All-Star break on what exactly the rotation looks like and where they want to be. Like, I think they know everything that Sabrina just mapped out, that there's a lot of different ways that they can go. And so I think they're going to really use the first 20 some odd games of the season to try some things out. And everything really is, an effort to play your best basketball in September and in October if you're an Indiana Fever fan. Like, they know they're going to have to. There's a lot of learning that is going to have to happen here. And one of the most interesting things, and I think, Zena, you obviously do a lot in the NBA too, and Sabrina, like me, we are avid followers of it too. One of the most interesting things I learned was that, Stephanie White, during the offseason, she also works for ESPN as a broadcaster. And so we sat down and we chatted a little bit at training camp. And I asked her, like, when you're in production meetings with head coaches before the games, like, are you picking the brains of Doc Rivers and Steve Kerr, coaches who have these transcendent stars? Are you learning from them about, how to coach a star like Caitlin? And she actually said that two of the coaches who have been most instructive for her in the lead up to this season were Mark Dagnall, who's the head coach of the Oklahoma City Thunder, and Kenny Atkinson, the head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Both of those teams are really, really deep rosters. Depth is their strong suit, and both, we should say, were number one seeds in their respective conferences, though as we tape this on Monday afternoon, not exactly the best time to be having a Kenny Atkinson Cleveland Cavaliers conversation after how they looked on Sunday night. Yeah, exactly. So we should say, like, those were two coaches she cited because in her mind, they look a lot more like the Indiana Fever with some stars at the top, but also 10, 11 players who could be getting more minutes. And so she was curious, like, how do you communicate with players who say they might deserve or they think they should have more playing time or should play a certain role, but we as a coaching staff think they don't? And what are the best practices you have when trying to keep people engaged? Like, to me, that reflects an awareness that this is a deep roster, this is a talented roster, this is an experienced roster, and not everyone is going to play. And that's just the reality of the situation. And I think it tells you something that, like, that is how they are thinking right now, both in the short term, but also, again, to try and keep people engaged for a postseason run down the line.
And the good news for the Fever is there's so much time for them to learn. You think about last season where they had to play their first 11 games in 20 days, and there was just no time for practice to actually get to know one another beyond the games. I think their first 11 games this season are over the course of 31 days. So
Oh, wow.
you're going to have a
little
lot
bit
more off
time.
days in there to actually get into the gym and learn each other in a practice setting versus just games.
Yeah, that was like the number one thing that was said about the Indiana Fever last year. Is like they literally have not practiced. They're not practicing. Their games have been their practice, which is crazy. And Ben, shout out to you for that question because it's a very thoughtful one because both of those coaches, Kenny and Mark, have Donovan Mitchell and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander respectively. But as you mentioned, a lot of talent up and down the roster as well. And so this is going to be very interesting. Let's continue talking about Stephanie right after this break because she's coming back to her program to see if she can kind of restore some of the glory that was there when she was last there. Okay, so now let's take a closer look at how things have changed at the coaching level for the Fever. And when it comes to this team, you've seen a lot of recycling. What's old is new again, including head coach Stephanie White. Not only did she coach this team in 2015 and 16, she was also the very first player in the history of the Indiana Fever back in 2000. She was playing for the Charlotte Sting, and then she was drafted to the Fever in the very first WNBA expansion draft. So there's a long history here for this team and Stephanie White. And particularly, she's an Indiana girl through and through. She grew up there and was even Miss Indiana, Miss Basketball back in 1995. So a little bit of royalty coming back as well. So we've talked a little bit about, how she's going to have to try and balance this team offensively. We could talk a little bit about the other side of the ball, but first let's take a step back and look at, we've seen Stephanie White coaching for a very long time. We saw what she did in Connecticut. There's an opportunity for her to change things completely in Indiana. So let's ask the bigger question, Ben. What does Stephanie White bring to this team?
I mean, the first thing that she brings that I think is really important in this context is institutional knowledge, right? That she, as you mentioned, Zena, has been with this franchise. It's been a part of her in some form or fashion for, the last 25 years. And it goes beyond just Stephanie White. The team president, her name is Kelly Krauskopf. She was actually the first employee that was hired by what was then just Indiana's WNBA expansion team in 1999. She was the person who picked Stephanie White. And Kelly Krauskopf has kind of been with Pacer Sports and Entertainment for the last 2+ decades. She returned to the Fever this past fall, and she was on this show actually talking about it. She returned to the Fever this past fall after being the assistant GM of the Pacers the past couple of years. So they have known each other for 2+ decades at least, and have a fondness. It's not just them two. Bree January, one of Stephanie White's top assistant coaches, was a player on the Indiana Fever's 2012 title team. Karima Christmas Kelly, another assistant coach of this Fever team, was also a player on that 2012 Fever team. So there is just a lot of institutional know-how. And where that reflects in, I have a feature, as I should plug, I guess, shameless plug on this story, coming out
always.
on, that gets into a lot of the topics we're talking about here and some others coming out later this week on the Indiana Fever. Steph White knows what it is like to be the star in Indiana. And obviously, what Caitlin deals with in terms of attention is very different than what Stephanie White dealt with back in 2000. But, Steph White knows that you have to block out the noise, that you want to keep kind of the main thing. And these are little tidbits that, she has kind of voiced to Caitlin in passing. They haven't had a big sit-down conversation from what I understand, to get into it. But, she knows the importance of protecting her peace. And Steph White, to me, even admitted that, she let external factors affect her at times. And so that is one of the big things that then on this year's Fever team, they're preaching to block out all the noise. And so that's where, again, that institutional knowledge is so important from Steph White and the rest of the staff.
Oh, I love that. And I love that there is a level of familiarity in the front office. We have seen the detriment that happens when there isn't that familiarity and that trust and that fondness, as you said, Ben, and how that can trickle down into the performance of the team. So now you take that familiarity with Indiana. You take the knowledge of Indiana. Let's be real. Indiana basketball is hot right now. Okay. Pacers and of course the Fever are just, are getting excited. Everyone's getting excited about them. And you got to talk about what's happening on the court. And what I love about this and what's hilarious about this is that Steph White absolutely knows what's hot in Indiana on the court because she's literally analyzing the Pacers. She has, at least during the playoffs, but she's been watching them all throughout the NBA season. She's been watching Fever throughout the WNBA season, scouting for them. And now Sabrina, she's got the opportunity to prepare them to try and take the helm in the W. We talked a little bit about the offense, but I've always known Steph to be defensive minded. So what can she bring either on both sides of the ball, but particularly with amping the Indiana Fever defense?
Yeah, I hate to take this back to offense, but I think part of it is...
You're good. You're good.
I apologize. Part of it is just Caitlin Clark had such an enormous offensive burden last season for the Indiana Fever. So if you think about how you get her more energy on the defensive end, some of it is just lessening what she has to do on offense, right? If she's not running 75 pick and rolls every game because it's the only action that Indiana can get, shots out of, then it allows her to have just more energy in her legs to play on the defensive end. And that's also part of why Stephanie White was, emphasizing Caitlin getting stronger, just having her in better shape to take on those defensive assignments, that we saw Connecticut target during the playoffs, right? Every single guard who had Caitlin Clark on them, that's where Connecticut was going. They were, involving her in a bunch of screen and rolls and staggers and all that stuff. So I think some of it is obviously Steph White is a very smart defensively schematic coach. Connecticut was number 1 or number 2 in defense in both of her seasons as a head coach there. They had more defensive talent. Alyssa Thomas is about as unique of a defensive player as there is in the WNBA, and she puts out a lot of fires. I don't think Indiana has a player like that, although DeWanna Bonner brings something that they haven't had. You think of her as 6'4", probably more of a post defender, but really she's probably the best point of attack defender now on the Indiana Fever. And Sophie Cunningham has been really good at defending in the post. She's just really strong and really difficult to move when you get her in the paint. We saw Lexi Hall take on more defensive assignments. I think having that just talent on the wings is going to help quite a bit, but I think just spreading the load a little bit, making sure that nobody's playing 32 to 35 minutes, everybody gets more reasonable loads is going to help just, I don't know, I thought Indiana spent a lot of effort on offense and it looked like they were having a ton of fun. They were running around, moving the ball, zipping it everywhere, but they just didn't look like the same team defensively as they did on offense. And if you were able to just conserve, your legs for both sides of the court, I think is part of what the beauty of all of that depth is on the Indiana Fever roster. As far as what they can do, I think a lot of this comes back to Aaliyah Boston. She was a tremendous defensive player in college, hasn't been as great at navigating the pick and roll as a big in the WNBA. What Steph White, I think the biggest change is going to be if she can help Aaliyah Boston with that positioning and making sure that she is not caught behind the play as far as the anchor of that defense. That to me is what I have my eye on in terms of this Indiana season.
Yeah, including some of that length there's a lot of strength, at least with the Indiana defense, but there wasn't as much length and agility. And so this is going to be really exciting to be able to see how that incorporates. Can't be Lexi Hall going all over the court this year. It's got to be more than just her. And so that will be a lot of fun. Now, you think about Stephanie White and you think about, her time with the Connecticut Sun. She coached there from 2023 to 2024, had a 55-25 record, went to the postseason, 7-7 record in the postseason, went to 2 straight WNBA semifinals. You stop right there, you're like, dang, she did pretty well. The problem was she didn't go further. It was like a ceiling. There was just like a cap on just how far she could go. And I can't imagine, Sabrina and Ben, I'll pose it to both of you. I feel as if that's gotta be sitting there. And Ben, I'll start with you because you talked to her. What does Steph have to prove now that she has this generational talent, a litany of tools to her at her disposal? What does she have to prove and how far she could take this team?
I don't know if it's as much of what she has to prove, but it is certainly what the Fever want to prove with her there. Like, this is a team that is explicit about having title aspirations. Like, the moves that they have made reflect a desire to compete, and not just compete in the long term, but compete in the short term, right? Like, we've talked about Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell kind of being the accelerant, and that this might be Caitlin Clark's second year, but like, the moves they make, the players they brought in reflect a desire to win now. And Stephanie White in her first team meeting was open about both wanting to have her players show unity, like, we're going to need to block out the noise, we're going to need to be united throughout, but also, like, they want to win. Like, Caitlin Clark, when I asked her point blank at Media Day, what does a successful season look like? She said, quote, a championship. Like, It doesn't get clearer than that,
pretty
folks.
Simple.
Like,
or
it's pretty simple.
Number 1 next year on Sabreena Scales. Sorry, go ahead.
Right, exactly. Well, I guess it would be and number 1.
And
it would come with it,
right. There you go.
And so, like, that really is the goal for them. And when they brought in all these players, the other thing that they were missing in last year, at least, was playoff experience. And so that is why they brought in, Howard, Bonner, and Colson, all of whom have won WNBA championships. Sophie Cunningham has played in a WNBA finals with the Phoenix Mercury. Like, that is why they targeted some of the players that they did. So, they know that they are going to need to take steps, and there's a lot to figure out. And we've talked about some of what they need to figure out, but like that is the goal here. That's what they're trying to, I guess, prove. That's the hump they're trying to get over. And we should say, to your point about kind of being an accelerant, like, Caitlin Clark's rookie season and just how prolific it was, being an all-star, being first team all WNBA, setting assist records, like, it really did set the tone for everything that has followed over the last couple months. And I want to just underscore it and say, like, this is commonplace for transcendent stars across basketball to accelerate timelines of franchises, right? And we've seen that in the NBA and also in the WNBA. And I wrote about this actually back in the fall when they had made a coaching change. Like, LeBron's first head coach was the head coach in Cleveland for just a season and a half. His first season and a half. MJ's first head coach lasted just 1 year. Candace Parker's first head coach lasted 2 seasons. Diana Taurasi's first head coach lasted just 1 season. Sue Bird, same deal. By her second season, there was a new coach on the sidelines. So this is what, like, great players like Caitlin Clark can do, and that is exactly what we are seeing with the Indiana Fever so far.
Well, Sabreena, if the goal is a championship for the team, perfectly fair. Sabreena Scale, number 1 as well. What is the goal, or how far can Caitlin go within this team? You talked about how Stephanie White is going to use her, basically allowing her a little bit more time off the ball. But how far can she go with this team?
I mean, I think if you were to ask Caitlin, and I'm sure Ben has, like, individual accolades are not really what's on her mind. It's anything in service of the team. But if Indiana does what they are capable of doing, getting a top 2-3 seed during the regular season, advancing far in the postseason, like, she was 4th in MVP voting last season as a rookie. I can't imagine that she's going to fall much lower than that. Like, this is probably going to be another first team All-W type season for Caitlin Clark if everything goes according to plan, and she's going to be probably further into the MVP conversation than she was a year ago. presumably because I don't think the Las Vegas Aces plan to stretch A'ja Wilson the same way they did in 2024. So those statistical markers might be a little bit easier to catch up with. But yeah, I think everything sort of came down to Caitlin on Indiana last year. And maybe the statistics won't look as gaudy as they did in 2024, although she does have 4 more games to break that assist record that she did set in 2024. But I do think that collectively, if the team is successful, that is going to make her a far more appealing candidate in terms of some of these individual awards as well.
Hey, all right. This is all coming together. Coming up to the big crescendo, folks. Will the Fever be the next big team? Ben, do you think they could take the title from the New York Liberty?
This year, I think it's still a little early
Okay.
for the Indiana Fever to win a championship. I mean, I think one of the things that we have learned just historically, and I talked about this, I want to say it was on a show last week or 2 weeks ago, they all blend together, was like there usually are these steps of progression that teams have to go through before winning a championship. And some people with the Fever would tell you that they've each gone through individual battle scars. They've built up the scar tissue from shortcomings in past postseason runs. And so like that's the experience. And so now that they're coming together, like they're taking those wounds that have healed and they're bringing it all together and maybe bypassing the work that is needed together to get over the hump. But I don't know if I fully believe in that theory personally. And I think there's enough questions to still say we might be a year early for them to totally make the jump. I mean, let's keep in mind, this is a franchise that still has not had a winning record since 2015. Just throw that out there, right? It's a decade. So to suddenly say they're going to win the title feels a little soon. I mean, I get that the roster has totally changed and they have transcendent stars or a transcendent star truly in Caitlin Clark on it, but feels a little bit early. The one thing, and I know we don't want to look too far at 2026, is like, to me, this is also a test and kind of figure it out year for the franchise big picture.
Sure.
Because under contract for next year, it's really Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston. And we will see what they do with their second round pick, Michaela Timpson.
Right.
Great start.
Right.
But it means like there's going to be a lot
dark.
of learning. There's going to be a lot of learning that happens about who they want to keep, what kind of player, who are the best fits. And I think they're still trying to figure that out. New front office this year who is making decisions, but like, were they the best ones?
Yeah.
Wait and see. So I think this is more of a tough semifinalist out than even getting to the finals out for me.
Okay. Sabrina, I feel like you're going to be on the same page because I am too. I think it might be a little premature to say that they're going to be snatching the crown off of Big Allie's head, but I do feel like it'll be a little bit of a tango. And I want to ask you, if you could predict the end of your season's Sabreena Scales, where would you put Indiana?
The whole point of these rankings is that they're very of the moment, I can't
I
predict what the headspace is going to be in October.
know.
I personally would not be surprised if they made the finals and lost this season. I don't think that they're going to end up winning. I am of the belief that there has to be some collective heartbreak that happens before you get to win. We talked about this with New York and with Las Vegas and all of these other teams that have just had to experience pain before they get to win the big one. And honestly, most great players tend to have to wait until year 3 to win their title anyway. Like A'ja Wilson didn't get to the finals until 2020. Breanna Stewart won her first title in her 3rd season. So that's sort of what I have my eye on. It's 2026 for the Fever. And again, all that could be up in the air because, like Ben said, they have 2 players under contract for next season. But yeah, I think there is really something to be said about like going through these experiences together. Like, admittedly, they have a lot more experience than they did last year when they went into the postseason with, I think, 19 collective games of postseason experience. DeWanna Bonner exceeds that like in 1 year, honestly. But
Right.
I think there is still some time here.
Okay. All righty, folks. I think that's going to do it for our Fever preview. I think we learned a lot. We clearly learned a lot. All the things that we didn't learn pretty much from those preseason games. We got a lot of information in this breakdown. I am very excited to see them out on the court this season and to see all of the different iterations that we're going to see as we lead up into All-Star break, because we know even last year with Indiana, it felt as if after the Olympic break, All-Star break, Caitlin came back with a vengeance. And particularly that Caitlin Aaliyah pick and roll became deadly in the second half of the season. So I am very excited to see what they can cook up in the first half and how that can show up and bake and be ready to eat in the second. All righty.
Zena, can I just throw one trivia question at you? Do you know where All-Star is this year? Because I think we should mention it.
It's in Indiana.
So I don't know how much of a break she's and the team are going to be getting over All-Star break as the host.
That's true.
It's really not that long on the W side.
Right. That's very true. Well, if anything, it's just adding more gasoline to the fire. That is Indiana Fever. Okay. All righty. When we get back, I got one little game to play, and it's very on Clark. Okay, so I know how ominous that sounded. On Clark. What the hell does that mean, Zena? It's because we're playing a game called Name That Clark in honor of basketball's most famous Clark. Our producer has made up this game, and I am going to be the one that's going to have it be played with Sabrina and Ben. I was so fortunate that I do not have to play this game because I suck at these games. I don't know if you guys know, but Sabrina is quite literally like a Jeopardy extraordinaire. Like, she's made for this type of situation. Ben
has played Jeopardy before. We should say has
like
been
quite
on
literally
Jeopardy.
has been on Jeopardy. Exactly. I was trying to get that out. But
Categories called Name That Clark, but
yeah, this is new. This is new. But the point is, Ben, you're in the hot seat. So let's go ahead and get this going. It's going to be very simple. I'm going to tell you about a famous Clark in history, first name or last name being Clark, and you got to guess who in the world I'm talking about. Y'all get it? Ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. First up, this Clark grew up in New York City and attended Syracuse University. As the host of a very popular TV show, they were responsible for introducing the world to what was regularly called the devil's music. They hosted many other TV shows, including a regular gig on December 31st, and also made a couple cameo appearances in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Raise your hand first.
Playing together, or is it both of us?
Yeah.
No, is it me? Did I buzz in
Should
first?
Let's
buzzing here.
There's no buzzing, so I
could have buzzed like 10 minutes ago.
You know what? I know. You know what? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do moving forward. Let's just say that was like a practice round. Okay. That's great. The answer is Dick Clark. Moving forward, I'm going to say 3, 2, 1. And whoever answers first, you got it. Fair?
Okay.
Okay,
that's a
let's
point for me though, so I'm gonna take that.
Why is it a point for you?
No. That was a practice round. That was a practice round. Okay. My producer is telling me I needed to impose more rules. Well, you should have. No, I'm joking. Should have told me. Okay. All right, let's get into it.
In the middle of the question, can we interrupt
you? Gotta wait for 3. You gotta wait for 3, 2, 1.
Right.
Gotta wait for the 3, 2, 1. Is that fair? Is that fair?
You were the host, Zena.
Or you just ask to me, or you ask to someone and then we get to steal if not. But
yeah, no, I feel like, that was a pretty easy one. So let's let that be the practice round. All right, we're gonna go 3, 2, 1. Whoever knows it first, go. Next up, this famous Clark comes from a Jewish family who immigrated to the U.S. fleeing Russian pogroms. They graduated at the top of their college class. They hosted a short-lived reality TV show called Stars Earn Stripes, and they ran for president in 2004. 3, 2, 1.
I got nothing.
Ran for president in 2004. Okay.
Hilarious. Yeah, I told you guys this was going to get a little bit tougher. The Clark was easy.
I got nothing.
I think we need an answer reveal here.
The answer reveal is Wesley Clark. Wesley Clark. Not sure if anybody listening knew that. I definitely didn't. Let's keep it moving. Score is 0-0. Okay. This famous Clark was known as the King of Hollywood. One of his longtime co-stars said of him, he earned the title. He walked like one, he behaved like one, and he was the most masculine man I had ever seen in my life. He had balls. And we ain't talking about basketballs, folks. 3, 2, 1.
Clark Gable?
Yes, Sabrina. Ding, ding, ding. Clark Gable. And that is 1-0 for Sabrina. Next up, let's keep it going. This famous Clark was named the 26th greatest guitarist of all time by Rolling Stone in 2023. They grew up in Dallas, Texas, and as a child were very fond of the movie La Bamba. They are known as being very mysterious and have a history of dating stars like Kristen Stewart and Carrie Brownstein. Now,
What a range.
hint, this person has a stage name that is Saint Vincent.
I hope
So we're just
Sabrina knows
supposed
the
to know
answer.
what Saint Vincent's
Sabrina,
real
name is?
Sabrina, I hope you know the answer.
3, 2, 1.
I don't know what St. Vincent's real name is. I don't know.
I have no idea. Here, Sabrina.
I just can't imagine somebody
Zena.
dating Kristen Stewart and Gary Brownstein.
Right. I couldn't tell you what this person was until I read it. The answer is Annie Clark. Yup. Did not make this date game, as you can tell. I don't know that person. Okay, let's keep it rolling.
I think after this ends, we should just rattle off the Clarks we know.
Yeah.
and we should
Right.
just
Yeah,
tell
this
you who
is
those people are.
This is tough. This is tough. All right, let's keep it rolling. This Clark came from a family of athletes. In college, their team made it to the Final Four. They are a dominant defender, and they've played a lot of basketball in the great state of Iowa. 3, 2, 1.
Dominant defender. So we're not talking about Caitlin.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, accurate.
Final
Accurate.
And a
Four.
defender.
And they played a lot of basketball in the great state of Iowa.
Yeah.
I feel like we
3,
should know this
2,
one better.
1. There
Yeah.
is a hint.
Okay.
UCLA
Oh. Is it
undergrad
Jalen Clark?
and
Yeah.
plays for the
Jalen Clark.
Gosh,
Fun
she
fact
just beat me.
Jalen Clark.
Yes.
Jalen Clark. Sabrina got it again.
Gosh, she just beat me.
Dang.
That was
about Jalen
Dang.
Clark. He wore 0 at UCLA, was
Mhm.
drafted in 2023, had to sit out his entire season as a rookie with an Achilles injury. By the time he comes back in 2024, somebody's already taken the number 0, so he switches it to 22. Great branding.
Oh, there you go. He was probably seeing somebody else at the number 22 that made sense. I like it. Jalen Clark. There you go. All right, Sabrina's 2-0. Ben, got one more to kind of try to do something here. Okay, you got it. I'm just like
She was
poking
on
at
Jeopardy.
you. Do something. Wake up. No, I'm joking.
She was on
Okay.
Jeopardy.
She was on Jeopardy. I literally prefaced all of this, so this is not unexpected. Last but not least, this Clark grew up playing the piano. As a freshman in high school, they were named the first team All-State in soccer, and in just 6 games, they scored a total of 26 goals. They're eligible for Italian citizenship, and they also reportedly love a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich from McDonald's. 3,
Sabrina, you got the answer
2,
here?
1.
Sabrina, you got the answer here?
Okay, a piano playing, goal scoring, bacon, egg, and cheese enthusiast is what we have here, right? With Italian citizenship.
At least being eligible for Italian citizenship.
Sure.
So think heritage.
Yeah.
I got nothing here again.
I mean, like,
Yeah, I got
And they
nothing.
played a
Dempsey's
lot of
real name
sports.
Clark. Like,
They played a lot of sports growing up in the Midwest, family of athletes, and they should have gone to a different school before they committed to their college.
okay,
And now,
It's so ridiculous.
there it is, Sabrina. Ding, ding,
It's
ding.
so ridiculous.
That's the one that did it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Can we
that's
share
where
some?
we ended
Can we
up with
share
this
some Clarks
game.
that were missing? Where is Clark?
you
Can we
know-
share some? Can we share some
Clark
Clarks that were
Kent?
missing?
I was
Where is
expecting
Clark Kent?
Clark of
Clark
Lewis
Kent?
and Clark.
I was
Like,
expecting
that
Clark
seems like
of
that was
Lewis
sitting
and
there as
Clark?
an easy
Like,
one.
that seems like that
you
was
know,
sitting there as an easy one.
Had we got
Annie Clark,
NBA
yeah,
niche,
it's
we could have
very
done
funny.
Ian Clark. that
Had
I
we
think
got
Sabrina and
NBA
both
niche, we
would have
could have done
gotten
Ian Clark
like
that I
long-time
think
NBA
Sabrina
vet.
and
Like,
both would have gotten like long-time NBA vet. Like
I need to do a deep dive into Wesley Clark.
Yeah, we learned a lot of new things today, and that is what the purpose of this pod is, okay? Growth. And we just grew in the amount of Clarks that we now know. And we also learned that Sabrina is really good at Jeopardy. Okay, that is going to do it for today. Good try, Ben. then coming up on Friday, it is our big 2025 WNBA prediction pod. Come for our prognosticating on who will win it all. And stay for our hot takes on who might have the ugliest alternate jerseys. Now, seriously, though, it will be a mix of serious and silly. Also, send us your questions at NoOffseason@theathletic.com. Also, comment wherever you can find us because we want to hear those questions. I particularly want to be supported in Sabreena Scales. But in case you got a different idea, send that over as well. If you haven't yet, hit the follow button wherever you're listening so you never miss a pod. And hey, check us out on YouTube. It is a lot more funny to see Sabrina's faces when Ben is talking on video. I promise. Drop us a comment wherever you're listening. We love to read them. And if you'd be so kind, give us a rating. We're doing hard work, including finding out who Wesley Clark is. So please, give us a 5-star rating. It took a lot of energy to figure that out. It also helps new people find the show. So as always, go check out the Yahoo Sports Hub. There's more to read and watch over there, sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. On behalf of The Athletic, I'm Zena Keita. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to No Offseason. To hear more, be sure to like and subscribe. We drop new episodes every Tuesday and Friday.